Welcome to Sell Like You, the ultimate sales podcast that will teach you how to make sales your superpower, transform your mindset, and in doing so, explode your sales beyond your wildest dreams. I'm Harriet Meller, and over the last 17 years, I've helped hundreds of top companies around the world, including my own, make more money and qualify more leads using simple strategies that work. In this podcast, you'll learn how I generated over 10 million in annual sales, along with the sales techniques, processes, and tools that will work for you to generate more dream-aligned clients and scale your business beyond what you thought was possible. If you're sick of the boring, outdated, and pushy sales tactics of the past, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
When something is repeated too often, people can tend to stop paying attention to it. Now, I call this wallpaper, or it's like wallpaper if you're seeing the things over and over again. And when we start to get used to it, we become less aware of what's going on around us. So if I give you an example of real life, let's say you walk your dog the same location every day. As you walk there, have you ever noticed a house, even though you've been walking that same way for the last year? That is the same thing as that wallpaper, because we start to zone out on things that are going on around us because we're seeing the same thing on repeat. And so when it comes to communication or updates or information, we need to stand out from the crowd and not become wallpaper. It can be known as ad fatigue in marketing. It can become banner blindness. There's all of these terms that I was researching when I was preparing for this update. And essentially what we want to do is we need the consistency, we need the repeat of information, but we need to make sure that it helps us stand out, because when it doesn't, we just become on repeat. It becomes boring, and then we just start to zone out and we don't know about anything that's going on. Now, the reason why I'm talking about, becoming wallpaper or the risk of becoming wallpaper on a sales podcast is because if we are running sales meetings, if we are assessing sales information or tracking certain metrics, and we haven't changed the structure, the information that's been gathered, all the metrics in the last 12 months, this is your sign to go and change something. If we think about it, if we show up to the same meeting every week, we go through the same information, then what happens is that we just become very immune to what's going on, and we just start giving the information. We haven't hit target. Okay, here's 3 things I need to do. Walk away, move on. Whereas if we change that up, let's say somebody's not hitting target, we've got an episode on that. But if somebody's not hitting target, we talk about sharing that, about changing those targets, about updating those targets. And so the reason why we do that is because we need to shock them into focusing on something else. So if the revenue has been the target and they have not hit that revenue target in 3-6 months, some people may be shouting at this podcast, being like, get rid of them. And yes, that's certainly one direction. But if you have been supporting, that the effort's there, or that they have been doing really well previously, but something's changed, think about changing the focus. So give them a mini target of reach out to 10 new people that you haven't spoken to before. Go and write down 15 reasons why people should purchase from us within this industry. Give them something else that's not revenue focused, because the target's either too big or it's become wallpaper to them that they're just like, whatever, I don't really care, I'm not really focused on it. And so we need to change things up. Now, when this comes to our sales messaging and the way that we approach, we want to find something that works. We want to use it consistently. Now, if we're using that consistently and we're approaching individual people or businesses, they're not going to know that we've done it for them, and them. But when it comes to sharing content, if the content we're sharing on socials, if we're doing it through the same webinars, even if we're running the same webinar every single month or every single quarter, change the title of it. The content doesn't need to be any different. But if I'm following you and all I keep seeing is the same webinar information every single month, it becomes wallpaper, I zone out. If you change the structure of the ad or the information or the title, like, oh, what's that one? And that might pique my interest and I may go along to that one. But the chances are I'm not going to go along to a second one if the content or if the topic is similar. So we've got to think about, how do we shake things up? How do we change things? That's why whenever you see an offer, JB Hi-Fi is a great example, an Australian home, I think I can call them a homewares brand. They do all of your electrical goods, etc. When they have a special offer on, it goes red. Like, it's in red, it's got the big jagged lines around it. It's like proper old school. It's like what I remember being in the UK back when we had like really old school shops that we no longer have anymore, like Woolworths that we have in Australia. We used to have Woolworths and then it had like, the big red signs. I shared this same example when I ran a workshop for L'Oreal, and we were talking about how do we stand out from the crowd from being these beautiful, aesthetically pleasing salons, and they're usually beige or pink, and they've got this lovely swirly writing. And if you think about it, they all look the same. Whereas if then we chuck something in the window that's a totally off-brand color but captures people's interest, and we do it occasionally, that's going to help us engage and get people's interest and pique people's interest and then hold it. So think about your approach, think about who you're speaking to, especially on a broader platform. So if you're using something like LinkedIn, if you are doing a newsletter and it's the same structure, if you are offering the same information or the same title of webinar and you're just doing it on repeat, think about how you can change it so we don't become wallpaper, so that we stand out from the crowd. If your follow-up emails are always the same, going to the same people, change it. If you are sending them to individuals, they're not going to necessarily know that it's gone to everybody. So we don't need to worry too much about finding something that works and using it consistently. But what we do need to be mindful of is that if we are sharing things, updating information, whether it's our sales meeting, whether it's what we're tracking, all of that comes into play around that fatigue of same, day in, day out, weekly, monthly, quarterly. And we want to get people engaged again. We want to shake things up. So a couple of ideas for you. So I was part of a team that ran a sales meeting, stood up, not every time, because once we do it every time, it now becomes wallpaper. So we would mix it up, we would go outside and they'd bounce a ball in between the people that were going to then share their information next. So I've given my numbers, where I'm at, what I need to do. So 2 or 3 things, I can remember them, don't need my laptop. I'd bounce the ball and it would go to somebody else. So that just mixes things up. Think about tracking something different. Think about throwing in an obscure track of how long have you spent on LinkedIn this week? How many posts that have you seen that were interesting? Who have you spoken to that supports Manchester United? And whatever that may be, consider how you mix things up so that we keep everybody engaged and interested, both within our team and external to your team as well. I hope you found this little short podcast episode useful, insightful, giving you something to think about. And if what you're doing works, if you're shaking things up and you've got a fully engaged team, don't change anything. But if you're finding they are just kind of dropping off in certain areas, consider reviewing what that is and think about ways that you could shake things up, make it less like wallpaper, remove the fatigue, and get people excited to be doing their job again.
Thank you for tuning into the Sell Like You podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and be sure to subscribe to never miss another one. A huge thank you to Vitality House for hosting today's recording, and I look forward to being back into your ears soon.